Nothing to it.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Nothing to It. I'm your host, the Tulip Guy, and today we're going to be cleaning that stubborn snowblower carburetor. One thing I'd like to make note of before we get started is this. As you can see, it is summertime outside. It is not winter. We do not want to be trying to take this apart, trying to get it started and clean out your carburetor when there is a foot of snow outside. So let's try to do this as a summer project. Moving forward, we are going to try and take off this top housing here. But before we get started on that, I'm going to remove this long pole here. It's missing a cotter pin here anyway, so I'm going to be able to slip that out. Real easy. Just let it kind of hang down out of the way so we can get our socket sets in at these bolts when we need to. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove these two nuts here, or bolts, sorry. Going around to the other side, there's two here, one here, and another one stuck down back in there. In order to get that one off, we're going to have to remove this belt cover here, which also has a bolt there. And if you come across to the other side, another one there. So we're going to remove all those bolts in order to remove this belt cover and this cover here. In order to get to these guys, you're probably going to have to use a wrench. Once you crack them loose, give them a couple little rotations there. You should be able to sneak your fingertips in there and twist them off. Once you have your bolts removed on each side, you should be able to grab and kind of wiggle this cover out of place. Set that aside with its bolts, and you now should have access to that bolt right there. That'll let you get this cover off. Once that last bolt is finally removed, you should be able to wiggle this free. Next thing we need to do is get the rest of this cover off from the carburetor. In order to do that, we're going to start with these two carburetor bolts here. We're going to pop this choke knob and throttle knob off. We're going to be careful with that. I'll show you that in a moment. But also, coming around to the other side, you'll see that this housing wraps around to the side. We're going to have to unscrew this in order to get the rest of this off. Alright, that top knob is really stuck there. We're going to have to get a little more leverage on that then. Oh, there we go. And of course this guy here. It's looking a little rusty, so I don't want to strip it trying to get it out, so we're going to be gentle with it. Hopefully it just cracks loose, just like that. It's got a little washer there. Just dropped it on the ground. Retrieve that. Make sure that stays with our screw. And we want to put that back on. That should basically free our cover now. We'll be able to gently slide this off. Being careful. And that side comes off easy. Gently try to pop it out. Just about there. There you go. There, she's loose now. At this point now, what you're going to want to do is take pictures to make sure that this all goes back on the same way it came off. Before we get too far, I'm going to point out that this is your carburetor buried in amongst all this stuff, but also above it you'll notice that there's this tube that's not attached to anything since we pulled this panel off. So down on this panel you'll see, so you can get my finger in there, right here. That little plastic tube, what this hose is going to have to connect back to after. From here, you'll notice on the panel that we've separated, there's 2 bolts here holding this little housing on. We're going to take those 2 bolts off in order to remove this little cap. Once we've cracked them loose with our socket, you'll be able to unthread them. While we're doing that, we want to make sure we're careful with these tubes, because we're going to need to put these tubes back on when we're finished. There we go, we got it free. Next thing we're going to do is follow this tube, which is our primer. You'll see in there, got a little hose clip on it. We're going to pinch that clip, pull it up over the tube, then use needle nose pliers to gently pull the tube free. You can get a better view here. Pull it free from this little pipe here that it's attached to. Alright, we've shimmied that up. Just going to gently pinch and remove that tube. Once we've got that free, we can now kind of move our panel off to the side. Rest it on the wheel below, giving us access to the carburetor. Next, we should be able to slide this little plate off. Once you've freed it from there, you can unhook it from this little metal arm that's there too. Being the silly person that I was when this snowblower wouldn't start, I decided it'd be smart to change the spark plug and fill it up with gas. And so now I basically have to drain a full tank of gas out of this thing in order to get this carburetor piece pulled off. Next thing we're going to do is drain the gas, which comes out of this line right here. So we're going to take our pliers, try to gently pop this tube off, and the gas is going to flow out of here and drain into a bucket. We can move this little hose clamp out of the way first. Alright. So that's moved safely up out of the way. Should be able to set up our funnel. And pinch that hose line off and drain it into this bucket. The hose is pretty stuck on there. Well, I think we're getting somewhere now. There we go. Hopefully we can catch it in the funnel right away without making too much of a spill. There we go. Drain it all into that bucket. Oh, there's this thin little link here. We're going to gently grab that, twist it out, and now we're able to freely pull this out. But as this is coming out, we're going to want to detach this link as well. Now our carburetor should be able to come freely off the carburetor bolts. As you can see, this carburetor is looking pretty dirty. Probably been sitting for a while. But along this process, you're going to see that I've been collecting all my parts, trying to keep the bolts and screws with the appropriate pieces for when I want to reassemble this thing later on. But we're still not done with this. We're going to have to take this apart and clean this up. Alright, so what you guys want to do is get yourself a plastic container. I just finished putting water in mine and draining it. Basically, I was just filling it up to make sure that water wasn't going to leak out of any corners or spots in the plastic. Also, what you want to do when taking this apart is treat this thing like it's a giant cube. I know it's not very cube shaped, but if you treat it like it has 6 sides, like this is 1 side, this is 2, this is 3, that's 4, 5, 6. If you treat it like that and keep the parts in order on a piece of cardboard like I've done here, trying to keep track of everything, you should do all right. While you're at it, you're going to want like some sort of scraper or scrub brush. It's just like a little wire brush here. You're going to need your carburetor cleaner. Try to gather up a couple tools while you're at it. You may need a few more. I'm not 100% sure yet. But what we're going to start with is this gold colored bowl area. We're going to take this off, starting with this bolt here. Another quick tip with this, you might want to take some photos of all these sides or different angles of it, so that as you take it apart, you have something that you can reference when you're putting it back together. Starting from the top here, I'm going to try and release this bolt here. cracks loose your bowl. That's actually looking pretty scuzzy in there, so that's going to need a good cleaning later. As you can see, once I remove this bowl here, there's the float. It's not really all that dirty. It'll probably come pretty clean with the carb cleaner. But you can see it doesn't really move very easily. It's kind of stiff. So we'll fix that once we clean everything up. On the other side, you'll see there's this like little linkage here. It seems to keep getting in the way while I'm trying to hold it. So we're just going to like unhook that, set it aside. We're going to come back to where our float is. We're going to hold that float down. There's a little pin here. We're going to pull this pin out. Try to push it out a little bit. There we go. Maybe use a different one to get a better grip, and maybe slowly twist pull this thing out. There we go. Looks like this one's got a little linkage of some sort stuck there, so let's try to pinch that off too. Looks like a spring of some sort. Maybe it'll slide back. There we go. Now you should be able to slide that right off. And keep those pieces nice and straight the way they were, because you're going to have to remember that little tab is going to link back into that when you put it back together. Now if you can, without damaging it, there's a seal right here that you want to pick off so that you can clean underneath and clean the seal itself. I'm going to try to get some sort of fine tip thing like this so you can kind of pick a little spot at the edge somewhere. Hopefully you can get your seal out without damaging it. There we go. Once you get that out, be gentle with it. You have to push that back in later. You want to reuse it, that is. Put that aside with the rest of your stuff. Next, we're going to want to get into this hole with a small flat tip screwdriver and just crack that loose and take it out. Turned out I actually couldn't reach down far enough with the screwdriver I had, so if you actually have an old bent or warped screwdriver like I have, I actually took it to the grinder, grinded down the sides so it'll fit down that tube to the flathead screw there a little easier. There we go. There it is. Inside this little chamber, you'll see, since we removed the screw, there's another little piece in there that you got to get. The way to pop that out is in through here. You can see the tube just barely sticking out, that little gold tube in the center there. You're going to want to push that down and pop it out. You can reach in the tool like this, push it down, and you should be able to slide it out. Try to keep track of the way it was oriented to go in, because when you put that back in later, it's just going to slide back in like that. Next, you're going to start from your bowl side and rotate it until you can see this little plastic screw here. You'll see on the very top, there's where the threads are that go through this little metal bar. What we're going to do is, on mine, it looks like the top, this little flat mark in there. Hopefully you can see it. Let's try to get it just clear up there. A little flat spot on mine. So mine is straight up straight up across here. So I know that can be sort of a landmark for me, but if yours is sort of off a little bit, you can simply come to the top where this metal thing is, mark a line there with a marker, whatever it is, so that you know where the top is when you put it back together later. You can take a screwdriver, anything that'll fit inside this hole, and you're going to screw it in and keep track of how many turns it goes all the way in until it touches that metal bar. Because when you take it out in order to clean the rest of the carburetor, you're going to need to remember how many turns to back that off to put this back in place properly. One. That was 2. 3. 4. 5. 5.25 turns by the looks of it. Once you figure that out, write it down, and then you can take this screw all the way out. So we know later on we're going to go 5.25 full turns to get this part replaced after it's cleaned. And then this should be able to just pop off. Little plastic piece here. There we go, she's coming. Pull that out. And now we're ready to start cleaning it with the carburetor fluid. This part I'm going to wear my gloves while using the carburetor fluid. Probably should have done it for the dismantling of this carburetor. It's really just gas that's getting on you, so I mean, you're just kind of stuck with the smell of gas on your hands if you do like what I did, but preferably you should probably put on some gloves to protect yourself a little better. But what we're going to do is we're just going to spray into every single hole that we can find. All these little holes like primer tubes, gas lines, little holes that you see inside here. Basically any hole at all that you can see, just spray it and clean it and try to get all this like green coloration off if you can. Just realized these gloves aren't exactly made out of what I thought they were. They just kind of got eaten apart by the fluid here. But we're going to try to keep cleaning. If you have to, wire brush it. Be gentle so as to not damage it too much. Try to get all that gunk off. Wow, these gloves are not what I thought they were. Holy, they're just getting eaten apart by this stuff. Same with your emulsion tube. Blast it in there. And make sure all these little holes, everything is cleaned out. There you go. Wow, so lesson learned here. It's actually eating through my plastic container that I had too. So depending on how cheap of a plastic you purchased, make sure you get the material that doesn't get destroyed by this stuff. So a little tip for this emulsion tube here, if you can, take one of these little wires off the end of your brush. All these little holes that you can see down the sides of that. You can just take one of those wires, push it through, kind of wiggle it around just to clean out those holes. All that bad gas that's collected in there. Just want to do a little extra cleaning while you have it taken apart. And basically, once you're done with that, I'll put it back with the rest of your parts. You'll see that a lot of these parts have come out much cleaner and nicer looking. The inside of the bowl got a little bit of gunk stuck at the top there that my wire brush couldn't quite reach into the crevices of, but you can see there's a huge difference in all the gunk that was on it from now to what it looked like at the beginning. What you can do, you can let it air dry, or you can take an air line and just basically blow out all the stuff that you have, all these little holes. Make sure everything's clear and unclogged before you start reassembling this thing. So we're going to try to reverse the order as best we can with this thing. Starting with this little plastic plug. Put that in, drop it down, push it into place. I'm going to take this screw. I'm going to put it in all the way and then back it off 5 1/4 turns like we tested earlier when we removed it. Put that all the way back on. All the way in. Now, there's the 1/4 turn. And then 5 1/4 now. Next, we'll come back around to the bowl side. We're going to place our seal back in there as best we can. If you have to, try to push it down a little bit. Seems to keep popping out on me here, so just gently push it into place. Next, we're going to put our float back on. This pin has to go in with it. So earlier in the video, we saw this little spring here, and that's where this little tab right here has to slip back in under. You'll notice this little plastic, or not plastic, this little metal piece here actually got a little splice in the middle, so you can actually pull it to each side. Might be hard to see on the camera there, but it does separate. When we put the float back on, we should be able to possibly pull it to the side, hook it on. There's one side, there's the other. We got our tube, connect it back to the spring, take this little pin. That pin has to go through this little metal bar of the float tube as well. There we go. Try to center that little pin. Now our float tube is back on there, and you can see it moves a lot easier than it did before. Next, take the emulsion tube, drop it in down that pipe, just like that. I'm going to take this screw, I'm going to thread that back in. Put it all the way in until it stops. Lastly, I'm going to take our bowl, place it on over top. The screw in the top here that holds it on. That's nice and tight. And then flip it back to the other side where we took this linkage off before. And hook it right in through there. Now, just before we put our carburetor back on, might want to go in around all the spaces where the parts are going to be put back on. Just try to clean out cobwebs and big dirt sediment pieces if you can. Inside your panel here, if you want, you can clean out in there. You'll notice this piece actually goes all the way down. You can see my finger, just the tip of it there. Now would be a good time to try and clean that out because some gunk gets built up in there over time. So, referencing your pictures that we talked about taking earlier, orient your carburetor onto these two bolt rods here. Line it up and slide it on. You'll see that the ends come out, but before you slide it on too far, you're going to want to connect these two linkages here that you took apart earlier. There's this tall one here that went into the top of this black piece here. And there's that thin little linkage piece that looped into a little tiny hole on the top of this here. So we're going to put those in. Should just snap back into place. Decided to try and grab a taller overhead aerial view angle of it. So here's your carburetor. I'm coming up to the top. There's this thicker linkage here that you're going to want to try and push on as you're pushing the carburetor back on. You're going to want to push that into place. Plastic where it needs to be. There you go. Slipping that down into place. And underneath, you're going to want to grab that thin little linkage. Push this on now a little closer now that we've got it. Now we've got it there. Grab that linkage here and hook it back into that plastic spot there. Next thing you're going to want to do is connect this gas line back to this little metal pipe here. Bend that in. Line it up properly there. Squeeze it on and move your clamp back down into place. When reattaching your primer tube back to the carburetor, you're going to take this rubber hose here and put it over top of this plastic tube right here. Get that bent into place there. Squeeze it on. Make sure it's all the way down. And then take this little spring clamp here. Let me do it with the needle nose pliers so we can let you guys see it easier. Squeeze that on. Release it. And push it back out of the way, because when this panel comes on to this little plastic casing here, you don't want this little piece of the clip sticking out, getting in the way between these two parts. So you want to just kind of tuck it in so you can close it back together. Now we're going to take our choke plate, put that linkage back on it. Line that in. And then line up the plate. That goes back in place. And those two bolt bars. A little something to keep in mind while you're trying to put the parts of the panel back together, that these two holes here, they are going to fit and line up on these two bolts right here. But I'll show you how that gets assembled shortly, but there's going to be two little spacers here as well that will also fit through these two holes in order to put the whole panel back on. I just wanted you to see this clearly now while I had other parts off to prevent you from seeing it later. The longer spacer goes on the longer bolt, the shorter one goes on the shorter bolt. So now that we've got this area cleaned up in here, got some of the gunk out, we've also cleaned our housing piece that goes on top of it. We're going to try to slip it back into place here. Trying not to harm these wires in the process. Slip it in under there. So you notice the electrical wire going to here runs underneath this little spot there. Coming to the other side, we're going to need to tuck these wires and tubes in behind that part of the housing, just like that. And this tube here actually clamps into the little plastic notch here. Once you think you have it in place, try to brace it in there. There we go. Take your long bolts, fit them back in, tighten them back on. So as stated earlier, this short spacer and long spacer here, they're going to fit into these holes to come out the other side of your panel. This tube has to get lined up and connected back to this little plastic tube here. And this lever here has to fit through this slot. It's probably going to take a bit of finagling. You're going to slowly line up your panel, trying to hold your carburetor parts in place because they're kind of in that spring action mode now. If you can line it up. Start trying to fit pieces back into place. There we go. Get this tube in the right spot. Now that the panel is pretty much back on, you'll notice that these tubes we were talking about, they're safely out of the way. Comes around to here. It lines up in that little notch in the plastic casing there. Down here is the end of those carburetor bolts. The threading is sticking out just a little bit. We got our lever attachments right there and here sticking out where we wanted them to come through. And on the opposite side of the panel, where we took that screw out in order to get this end of the panel off. So we're going to go ahead and reattach all those things now. Starting with the easy piece first, I'm going to take our screw and line up that plastic panel piece there. Just thread that back in. Just snug it up. And you move back around to the other side. On the other side, I'm going to put these nuts back on the end. Tighten them all back into place. And then last but not least, the throttle and choke knobs. Little plastic slot there. You're going to want to line up this metal slot here. And if you noticed earlier in the video, I was trying to take it off gently. And I had to give it a little bit more force. And I thought I broke this little knob trying to remove it. So what I've done is I've taken a little sandpaper and knocked a little bit of the rust off of this lever. Put this in a little bit easier this time. Let's line it up and snap it on. Now that the carburetor and panel are all reassembled, before we finish putting all the housing stuff back on the outside, on top, we're going to actually test it out. We're going to put some gas in it and see if this thing starts. Going to replace this housing next. Once again, I'm going to make sure we get all these bolt holes lined up. The panel and the casing, the parts at the side. And as we can remember, this one here, we needed this belt cover area removed in order to get to that. So we're going to install that one first, work our way back around to all the other bolt holes to reinstall this. While not trying to lose any of our bolts into places we may not be able to reach. I got lucky there. And 2 on the back side again. Then we'll use our socket and tighten them all on. And last but not least, I'll put this belt cover back on. And try to squeeze that back in where it came out. There we go. Once you get it in place, try to get these bolts in place on each side. And once again, using your socket, tighten that on. And that concludes today's episode on how to clean your snowblower carburetor. I hope this has saved you a lot of future frustrations and that you're up and running in no time, especially before the snow hits the ground. And if you like watching content like this, please like, subscribe, and always remember, there's nothing to it.